This is hopefully going to be a relatively short webinar, about sort of 40-45 minutes. Just in terms of quick introductions, my name is Tim Rowe. I'm a solution architect with Hitachi Solutions, and I'm also joined today by Ian Stanley, who's our account director for public sector and not-for-profit organisations. The context for this session is some work that we've been doing over the last 8 to 12 months for a number of adult care providers to showcase how modern business applications from Microsoft can help providers become more dynamic. I'm going to start with a quick recap on some of the common challenges, and then we're going to spend most of the time, I'll just minimize my screen, really focusing on how the solution can help those organizations and really focusing around care plans, support workers, and managing the money. To keep the background noise to a minimum, I think I've muted everyone now, and then what I'll do when we get towards the end, I'll open up the lines and we can then take some questions at the end. So let's get started and have a look at some of the key challenges. I won't spend too much time on this because obviously most of you are going to be familiar with these, but just a sort of quick recap. Inevitably, funding adult social care continues to be a significant issue, but increasingly we see it more so as a result of multiple or complex funding models, whereby the local authority is obviously partially funding a portion of the care plan, but increasingly we see some of the family members now chipping in and also contributing to the cost of that care plan. We also see an increasing burden placed on care providers to satisfy an increasingly rigorous audit environment and landscape. And as most care providers will typically draw on full or part-time employees or bank workers and agency staff, effectively allocating work to the most appropriate resource becomes more challenging as the number of resources increases and the constraints placed on those resources increases as well. And then lastly, care providers operate largely, or rather historically have operated largely manual processes with limited investment in technology. But as the number of people entering the care market increases, together with more complex funding models, we believe care providers are reaching a tipping point and now need to make strategic investments in core technology as well as supporting business processes. So with that in mind, let's have a look at how we can help in that arena. So looking at the care plan. In a dynamics care provider, the care plan really doesn't sit on its own, but is really at the heart of the organisation. And by that specifically what we mean is that firstly it connects with the care provider portal, providing a simple web-based access to all internal resources, but also supports the provision of information to other stakeholders such as the extended family. It connects with the scheduling and rota engine to ensure that appropriate resources are allocated. It also connects with the document management solution, so that all matters relating to the care plan and the provision of care can be readily accessible. It connects to the contract and finance solution to ensure that all funds are made available and are invoiced appropriately and correctly. And then lastly, it also connects with the reporting engine to enable the rapid production of operational reports through to financial reports. So with that in mind, let's have a look at what that might look like in reality. So I'll just jump across into my demo environment. And for each of these three demos, I'm actually just going to take on the persona or role of either a support manager, a support worker, or a finance operative. But if I first log in as a support manager, the first thing we present is a nice, simple, clean and crisp user experience through a portal. If I jump across to the business services node, from here, and all from the single portal, first off I can view all of my service users, so the people that I'm responsible for, the people who are consuming my services. As you can see, I've got a number of service users, but if I just dwell on Joe 10 for a moment, I can click on that link and then I'm presented with a nice simple record of basic information relating to Joe as an individual. His name, his contact information, his address, key contacts, whether or not that's doctors, next of kin, social workers, date of birth obviously, and so on and so forth. Let's move that down. If I carry on down, if we look at organisations, what I can see here are those organisations that I typically interact with, and in this particular demo environment I have a number of authorities and some private funds. But if I look at the local authority, I can have a look at our contact record with that local authority in terms of names and addresses information, our primary contacts, and so on and so forth. But what I can also do is actually look at what contracts we have with this local authority. So if I go across over to here on the left-hand side, I can click on my contract node, And we can see actually we have a number of contracts with this local authority. We have a multi-funded contract, which I'll come back to later on, and we also have a simple contract or a contract opportunity. From here I can open up and actually view the information relating to that contract. So in this particular case, this particular contract with the local with the ABC local authority, we're actually providing care for 3 service users, Irene, Joe and Kate. We're providing outreach services on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from 10 till 4. We can also create within here the financial aspects of that in terms of the costs that we're going to ultimately invoice the local authority for, and apply any standard pricing models that may be applicable. If I come out of there, if I drill down and look at my support plan. So from here I can actually look at, and we'll focus on Joe again, the support plan that Joe has. So the support plan really details everything relating to Joe in terms of the care that we need to provide for this individual. So obviously some narrative relating to the individual is here, a photograph if it's relevant, their preferences, their circle of support, the kinds of support they want to be involved with, any qualities or skills or training that the support worker needs to provide or have, and then importantly the actual outcomes. Okay. And equally, as you can see here, I've got a number of outcomes that we've got set up within this care plan, and one of which has been achieved and a number that we're working towards. But equally, these things never stand still, and obviously these things, as these evolve, you can actually add in additional support outcomes just simply by clicking on this new support outcome button at the top here. We also record at the underneath that their average week, and again this is summarising the activities we're going to be helping him with. In this case, he goes to college from 10 till 4 on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and he obviously needs help getting there and assistance whilst he's there, and then obviously returning home as well. With all of these documents, you can also attach unlimited amount of notes and correspondence and other salient documents. So this support plan, which is now accessible within a simple portal, can then hold not only all of the contractual obligations and the details of the actual care plan, but also any supporting narrative and correspondence and information that may be relevant. And then lastly, since we are, or have rather now captured and hold within the portal the support plan, we can obviously then makes the life of reporting so much easier. So if I go across to my dashboard, here we can see some examples of the kinds of reports that you can produce from the system. So firstly, I've got a tracker here that shows me the number of outcome statuses the outcomes by their status and dates. So you can see the number that we've actually achieved, a number that we're working towards, and a number perhaps we've actually abandoned. We can also monitor how often the support plan is being reviewed, and that's often a key requirement that these plans are living, and therefore we need to actually have those formally reviewed, and therefore we need to actually have evidence of that and be able to report on that. If there are any incidents or cases, obviously we can raise new cases and track those through. Some of those may be obviously referred through to the Care Quality Commission, so we can track how they're going, and obviously get a summary view of our case mix in terms of those broken out by incident, accident, complaint, or a freedom of information type request. These are just examples, obviously, but the important salient point here is, since we have that information in the system, we're holding it against the care plan, we have the information within the care plan, that means we can then produce this kind of BI information very easily. Okay, so we'll shut that down. Let's go back to the slide. So just a quick recap on that segment then. As you saw, what we provide is a single and consistent repository for all the care plans that can be accessed via a simple browser, and that makes it very easy to manage the whole life cycle of that care plan. And since we can access it from a browser, that obviously means your support workers and support managers can access that from the office, from PCs located at the service location, or even remotely from home or from other mobile devices. In this scenario, the care plan is fully integrated with the scheduling engine, which we'll see in a moment, and what that means is any changes that we make to the care plan in terms of new outcomes, new sets of requirements, are pushed down to the scheduling engine and then picked up and resources allocated appropriately. And then, as I mentioned at the end, since we have now digitized that care plan, it makes it very easy to then track and report compliance and performance against that plan. Okay, changing gear, and then looking at it from a support worker. And I guess it's probably fair to say, if the care plan is a central document around which the organisation pivots, the support worker or support manager are the pivotal resources in a care providing organisation. It's worth noting our solution does schedule and allocate work to the right resource, taking into account a whole number of constraints, whether or not there's time, qualifications, cost, scheduled hours, etc. It also fully supports absence management, so only available resources are actually allocated to work or for work. It enables the support worker to actually interact with that rota through a simple portal, which I'll show you in a moment, but also increasingly now through mobile devices, whether or not that's an Apple-based device, an Android-based device, or even a Windows-based device. And then lastly, what it does, it also helps you provide an easy way to manage your worker qualifications, their skills and their experiences. And really that is then used by the scheduling engine to make sure you are efficiently and appropriately allocating work to the right resource at the right time. So let's have a look how that may look. So I'll go back into my demo environment, and this time I'm going to log in as support worker 1. So as you saw before, we have a very similar experience, and I'll go across onto the business services node. But and as before, the support worker themselves can view the people that they're actually responsible for. They can have a look at the support plans that they are responsible for, and we'll pick on Joe for a moment. And here we see the Joe support plan as we saw earlier. But also what they can do is actually produce some reports to actually show and actually produce a paper copy of that care plan. So here's an example of one. And then if we click onto the next page. And it just gives you another way of representing and communicating that care plan, perhaps with the individual concerned or perhaps even their family or the local authority. With all of these kind of documents and reports, you can obviously customize and change the layout. If you needed to, you can actually output into a PDF format or a Word document and so on and so forth, and obviously print too. So if we go back, if I now dwell onto and go onto my rota, and I'll just put it into a week view, what you see here is, again, through the same portal, as well as being able to view your service users, your support plans, you can actually also view your actual rota. And you can see here, if I look at this appointment we had in fact yesterday, I can open up that appointment, and you can see it's in relation to Hetty. And I can actually just, from within the appointment, click on that link and it takes me into the care plan for Hetty. So I can view straight away all the things I need to do and be aware of with regards to providing care to Hetty. Equally, I might choose to look at it by sort of location. So again, I can get a view based on the service location. Now, service locations could be the individual home, as is in the case of Hetty or Eric, or it could be that actually, in the case of Joe and Irene and Kate, I think it was, the actual service location is the college. So that's where we're ostensibly providing the care. And equally, it could be care home as well. You'll also notice we have some options in terms of filtering. So I'm viewing everything as of today, but I may choose to perhaps have a look at it from a week perspective, so I get a better sense of what and how work is being allocated. And I may even want to filter based on types of work, whether or not that's outreach, supported living, and so on and so forth. Okay, if we just change gear just a fraction, and I'm just going to go through to the employee services side. So what employee services enables us to do is to allow the support worker, or support manager for that matter, manage and self-serve a lot of their own personal information. So for example, if we go down to personal information and then go across to competencies, I can see under certificates all of my current certificates and importantly the expiry dates. So I can see I've got my CRB, some health and safety, medical experience, and so on and so forth. Okay, if it's appropriate and you as an organisation allow that, those users can maintain that themselves, and they can clearly do that through the portal here by simply clicking on the edit button and making a change. Equally, you may choose actually to centralise that type of activity and actually HR does that, and as soon as they do that within the HR module, that's instantly visible not only through the portal, but also instantly visible to the scheduling engine, so it can then take that into account. If I just go back, whilst I'm here, the other things you can do is obviously raise your own expenses. So if in the provision of care you have incurred some costs, whether or not that's car parking or some miscellaneous food bills and so forth, you can then raise an expense report through this mechanism and submit that through. And that, if it's appropriate, will then go against that relevant contract to be then funded and paid. Equally, from timesheet perspective, and as we'll see, the rotoring will generate timesheets for us, but if necessary, we can also generate our own timesheets directly from within here. And similarly, actually raise absence requests. Okay, so absence requests are typically booking holiday in advance. Registration is usually retrospective, where perhaps I've been off sick, for example. Okay, one last little thing. So I'm just now going to log back in, but this time as a Service Manager 1. And I'm going to go across to Business Services, and I'm going to go down to Service Management, because what I can do from within the same portal, I can then reach out to the scheduling engine. I can click on the resource appointment view, and perhaps I can put this onto a 7-day view. So as a service manager, I can then get a sense of all of my workers, what they're currently doing, by day, by week, by month, so forth, filter by discipline as before. I may also, though, want to actually find out where my workers are. So, for example, I can see I've got a bank worker here, number 4. I can simply right-click and say, OK, pinprick them onto a map for me. Now, what that's actually doing is based on the mobile device that they have, it's taking the GPS feed to actually identify that bank worker 4 is somewhere located in Cambridge at this moment in time. Equally, I might want to have a look at the route that they've got to take for their appointments today, so I can actually display that route on a map. So you can see they're currently in the care home over here, and actually for the next appointment, which is actually to go and see Hetty, they've got about 10-minute driving time. Occasionally, obviously, people do go sick, and you might need to reschedule. So you can, within the portal here, I can actually just pick on this appointment for Thursday, for example, and I can then simply just drag it and reallocate it to another resource. So, for example, I might pop that down to here, for example. Now, you'll notice it was changing colour. That was obviously what the system is doing, is checking various constraints, one of which is obviously the appointment time. This one here is actually saying they don't have the food and nutrition qualification. But I'm going to override that and continue. So if it's appropriate, the support managers can make changes to the rota and actually override any of the constraints to accommodate a particular requirement as and when it's appropriate. Okay, so we'll close that down. So just a quick recap then. As you saw there, what our solution does is to take obviously a multitude of variables, including skills, qualifications, travel and costs, in determining the most effective rota and thereby really optimizing your resource utilization. As you saw, both support workers and support managers can access the rota from a simple portal. They can also do that via the mobile client, which I'm going to show you in a moment, and actually be able to complete activities through that mobile client or through the portal. And then lastly, we provide a very simple mechanism for the actual completion of that care, predominantly through the mobile client. But if you're not using the mobile client, the system will actually automatically assume that work scheduled is work completed and therefore generate timesheets off the back of that. So before we move on, let's just have a quick look at that mobile client. I'm just going to jump across to another image. This is an emulator showing what the mobile client looks like on an iPad, but as I said before, it works on both the iPads, the iPhones, the Android devices and the Windows devices as well. And you can see here's my next appointment, so I can just simply click on that. I do have a choice of accepting or declining for whatever pertinent reason. I may also want to get some driving directions, so I could click on that and it will call out to Bing Maps and then work out how long it's going to take me to get there. And again, it's based on the GPS of the device, which clearly I'm sitting in London at the moment, so I've got a bit of a travel to get up to Cambridge. But I can go through and accept that. And as you do, the system time and date stamps everything. Now it does that for a couple of reasons. Obviously, it then updates the rota. So a service manager, for example, can view whether or not you're running behind schedule or not. But also that time is captured, and it may well be that the contract is priced in such a way that your travel time is perhaps free or at a lower rate versus actual provision of care time. So I'm going to confirm that. I'm going to confirm I've actually arrived. So the wonders of technology, I've got there immediately. I can then start this appointment. I can view the fact I'm actually looking after Hetty. I'm just going to confirm that. And let's assume I've now completed that task. The last thing they'll ask me is, do I actually need to go back for this? So I'm going to say no. I have the option of actually recording the fact whether or not I was injured or not, so no, I wasn't. And also you have the option of actually having customer approval if it's appropriate as well. So if it's relevant, you can have a customer signature, they could put their name in. So. Equally, we also support PIN codes as well as another mechanism of authorization. And equally, in a lot of cases, that's not going to be possible or relevant, so equally, you wouldn't have to do that either. So I can confirm that, let's close that one down, and then it's opened up my next appointment. It's as simple as that. Okay, so moving on to the last segment of this session, which is around managing the money. So what our solution provides is really an efficient mechanism to capture time and expenses. As you saw earlier, if we're using the mobile client, that work can be dispatched automatically from the scheduling engine. The the support worker can actually acknowledge that, can accept that, can complete that work, and as they do, that is automatically updated back into the scheduling engine and then ultimately into the finance system as well. If you're not using mobile clients, then we also support the model of work scheduled is work completed, and what that will then do is then generate a timesheet and submit that for approval, and giving the support manager the opportunity to then review that, make any changes prior to actually approving and posting. And then lastly, around the multi-funded contracts. As I mentioned earlier, we see this increasingly so, where the local authority, for a number of reasons, will only pay or fund a portion of the care plan, and increasingly either the individual or the individual's family will chip in and contribute some funds to pay for certain aspects of the care plan. And accordingly, what the finance system needs to do is obviously understand that relationship and affect the appropriate rules when we're invoicing to ensure that all the funding parties are paying for the right services. So let's have a look at that. So in this case, we go into the finance system. Just give that a moment to spring into life. And in fact, whilst that's loading up, I mentioned about the timesheets. I'll just show you a quick example on that. So if I log into Service Manager 1 again, to the portal, go to Employee Services, but this time I'm going to go to Approvals. What we should see in a moment is actually a timesheet that's come through from one of our bank workers. So I can open that up. It's relating to this particular contract. They did 9 hours on a Wednesday. I can obviously make any changes, review any comments that are attached to this. But let's assume we're happy with that, and I can then just approve that. I can put some comments in if I choose to, and then click Approve. Okay. So if we close that down and just open up the finance system, so the way this works within the Microsoft solution is every contract equates to a project in our terminology. So if I open up my list of all my projects, I should see my contracts as we saw earlier. So I've got my normal contract, my multi-funded contract, and so on. If I go to my normal contract, I can go across to the Manage tab, and I can view all the transactions that have been generated. These will either come through the mobile client or through the timesheet route, whichever happens to be appropriate at the time. But if we focus on the multi-funded one for a moment, so I'm just going to open this one up. Just maximize the screen. Couple of things you can do here. The first one is this. You'll notice at the bottom I have this collaboration workspace. Now what the system allows us to do is for every contract actually set up a dedicated SharePoint collaboration site where we can store all documents and correspondence relating to this contract. And if we choose to, actually make that accessible to the fundees, so the local authorities or even the family members as well. But if I just now go across to the project contract, because this is where we can define who's paying for what, basically. So if I open that up, and we'll just maximize the screen. For this particular contract, we can see actually we've got two fundees. We've got, in this case, a local authority, but we also have a private fund. And if we had the actual service user, they would be listed here, or the service user's family, they would all be listed down here as fundees. But once you've defined your funding source, you can then set up through the funding rules how and what they're paying for. Now mine is relatively simple in that I've got an allocation rule set up that all costs are funded on a 60-40 basis. But as you can see with these other options down here, what I may choose to do is put in perhaps another funding rule whereby a fundee is only paying for expenses of the type of travel, of a category of car rentals, for example. So you can be very sophisticated and very granular in how you set up your funding model for a particular contract. So we'll remove that. So on this contract here, we obviously have two fundees. We have, if I go across to manage, we have a number of posted transactions, some of which have been invoiced, some haven't. So what I can do from here is to say, well, let's raise a new invoice. I'm going to go across to invoice processing. And there's a number of transactions that we've just created. And from here I can say I'd like to raise a new invoice proposal. Now you'll notice here this little information box that's just popped up has actually raised me two invoices, number 23 and number 24. And that's because we have two customers, two fundees. So there'll be one to the tune of 60% and one to the tune of 40%, as shown and broken down here. Okay. The Manage Invoice Presentment option allows us to add in additional narrative onto the invoice at the point of raising it. So this might be some correspondence and some details that will just help the recipient of the invoice to understand in a little bit more detail what the invoice is for and therefore hopefully pay them a little bit more promptly. But let's assume we're happy with these, and I'm just going to go through and submit those. I can put some comment in here. Now what this will actually do is actually then use the workflow within the finance system to route this through the organisation for approval. Now that could be, for example, the service manager responsible for the contract, or perhaps an area manager, or just a general finance person who's responsible for approving invoices prior to submission. So we'll let those whirl away. And in the meantime, I just want to cover off a couple of other little bits. I'm just conscious of fast approaching our time. Against each of these contracts, under the control option, we can then get a sense of how we're tracking. Firstly, I can produce, for example, a project statement or a contract statement, and I can run these as many times as I choose for a particular date range or everything up to today's date, for example. Click on Calculate, and that's now going to produce me, in effect, an income and expenditure type statement. So as we can see here, we've actually got some revenue to the tune of 2,500, but we've actually got costs to the tune of 4.3, so we're actually making a bit of a loss here. So what I can do is to say, well, okay, well, how is that happening? So I can look at the underlying transactions that make that up. And as we can see down here, actually, I've got a particular support worker that we've got at a rather high cost rate, which is really what's causing that loss to be incurred. So perhaps, I may want to do something about that and perhaps either use a different resource or so on and so forth. The other options you've got, obviously, from an invoice control perspective, so this will detail what invoices, so again, against any contract at any point in time, you can get a sense of what invoice has been generated, what's available to invoice, and you might even have some costs that you are capturing but you're not able to actually recharge out. So you can at least identify those, and as before, you can come to the transactions option and actually look at the underlying transactions that made that up. So the last little bit, before I open up for questions, just one quick one is around tracking sort of actuals and forecasts, because against each contract, we can then hold a forecast, okay, either both in hours or expenses. So I can look at the hour forecast that I've got, so we're forecasting a number of hours over a number of months. If I just move this down a little bit, for this particular contract. And you can hold varying forecast models. So you might have your budget. So when you first created the contract, you had an assumed cost base. That becomes your opening budget. But then as you progress through that contract, you then may want to refine that budget and create additional forecast models. And what that therefore means is you can then track but not only your actuals versus budget, but actually actuals versus budget versus any number of forecast models. So you can really get a handle on how you are tracking. And the idea being ultimately you can then clearly take corrective action if you see that things are tracking in the wrong way. If I just jump into Excel very quickly, just to illustrate how that might appear, what you can do is, I'll just open up this little very simple workbook here. So an Excel workbook here, but this is using the Dynamics extension that allows me to actually produce real-time reports from the finance system. I can just click on my contract ID field, and then on the right-hand side in a moment, will pop up a list of my contracts. And here we are. So I'll just slide that over a little bit. So if I focus on my multi-funded one, and click on that, and check that box there, what you see is it's now gone back into AX, and for the 3 months I'm looking at, in this case November, December, January, it's then brought out what the actuals were and what the actual income and expenditures are, but also what the budget was and the forecast. And you can see obviously how I'm tracking and trending. I may like to understand a bit more detail as to what made up this income here. So what I can do is actually drill back, still within the Excel workbook, to the underlying source transactions that made up that balance. And there we go. And again, from here, if I needed to, I can then export those into a separate workbook for further analysis. Okay. So just to sort of recap that last little segment then, really what we're trying to get across there is really that our solution does support virtually unlimited funding models. And what that really enables care providers to do is fully embrace the concept of sort of personal budgets, personal care plans, but also provide the appropriate due diligence and transparency that inevitably will follow on from that. As you saw, the system will automatically create the care transactions either via the mobile client or via the timesheet, which means providers can accurately book cost and revenue and actually invoice on a timely basis. And then lastly, through the rich reporting tools, you can instantly track your care plan funding performance and, if necessary, obviously take any corrective action. So, just to sort of summarise, certainly at Hitachi, our mission and values are really here to help people and businesses throughout the world obviously realise their potential and really inspire the next generation. Hopefully today, what we've shown you is how you can become a Dynamics care provider. Use it through the delivery of familiar applications that your people want to use, providing the flexibility to support your business agility, and also on a platform that spans both from on-premise and then increasingly now out into the cloud. So in the last few minutes we have available, I'd just like to thank you for your time today and hope you have found this session useful. If any of what you've heard or seen today has struck a chord, then please feel free to either reach out to myself or Ian Stanley, and our contact details are on the next slide. So if I now just open up for see if there's any questions. So are there any questions at this stage? No? Okay, well I'd just like to thank you all for your time. So hopefully that has been useful. And we'll probably circle back round in a few days once you've had a chance to actually digest what we've seen and talked about today. So one final call for any questions. No?
Yeah, is this webinar, is that, would it be possible to have a copy of that?
Sorry, was that you, Andy? Oh, okay. So someone asked the question if we could actually provide the copy of the deck. Yes, we will. So we'll circulate that back around for everyone, and obviously you'll have our contact details. So if once you've had a chance to reflect on this, there is something of interest there, then please feel free to reach out to, as I say, either Ian or myself. The demo itself, so I had another question come through. Yes, we will be posting the demo up on our website, so if at a future point in time you'd like perhaps to share some of the aspects of this with some of your colleagues, then we'll make that available as well, and we'll send you a link once we've got that uploaded.
I'm muted.
So any final questions? No? Well, okay. Well, in that case, we'll close the session. I'd like to thank you all for your time, and we'll hopefully be in touch in due course. Thank you.